right, it's always good. We did earlier, but hey, always good. We had a few join in. So somebody else, please pray for our time again. No problem.
Yeah, I do it.
All right, please do.
Our Heavenly Father, as we come together today, Father, we're coming together to learn and to learn how to interpret your word more clearly, as the Rabbi had just stated. Father, we also want to pray for the world.
All right, it's always good. We did earlier, but hey, always good. We had a few join in. So somebody else, please pray for our time again. No problem. That's our delay recording. I apologize. Go ahead.
Okay, so start out over.
Pick up where you left off.
Okay, yes. We just want to pray for the world, Father. The world today, Father, is in terrible need of your word and your understanding. All over the world, we got fire. We got historical events happening everywhere. In California, I'm praying for my family in California and all my friends in the state of California and all out Southwest. For the first time in 80-some years, they're getting a tropical storm one. My sons and daughters don't know what that even means. So, and that's all over the world. We got heat down here in the South that is historical. That's we need to understand that you are real and you're revealing yourself to us, that we need you more than anything else. And I appreciate it, Father, because I'm using this thing that you are doing in the earth, or allowing to happen in the earth, to get more and more people to believe in your word and to believe in you. And I thank you for it, and I praise you for it. Father, I thank you for my community that I'm with, that you have joined me up with, that I know about faith of personal problems and needs and stuff. I thank you for that, because this is what a true community and family is supposed to look like. But I thank you and I praise you that, Father, that you are in the process of making John's son better.
Yes, Lord.
We thank you for it, Father. We thank you for all the needs of anyone on this call. We thank you, Father. We ask you to just please help us with the mentally ill that we are dealing with as a family.
Yes, Lord.
We just ask you for it, Father. We just praise you that you are one that we can go to and put our request to you, Father. But Father, as always, we would accept your will. Whatever your will is, Father, we would accept. So today, Father, as we come together as a community once again, help us to open up and to realize and reveal yourself to us more. We thank you. We praise you in the mighty name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen and amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Brother Will. Appreciate the prayers. And again, thank you all for just your presence. I'll ask somebody to read our passage for us today. Let's read the entire passage today. We'll start at verse 25 in chapter 14 of Luke, and we'll end at verse 35 in the same chapter.
Now, a large crowd was gone along with him. And he turned and said to them, if anyone come to me and does not hate his own his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which one of you, when he wants to build a tower, does not first sit down and calculate the cost to see if he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who observe it begin to ridicule him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king, when he set out to meet another king in battle, but not first sat down and consider whether he is strong enough with 10,000 men to encounter coming against him with 20,000. Otherwise, the the other is still far away. He sent a delegation and asked for terms of peace. So then none of you can be my disciple who does not give up all your possessions. Therefore, salt is good, but if even salt has become tasteless, what will it be seasoned? It is useless, either for salt or for the manure pile. It is thrown out. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. 25 to 35.
Appreciate you. Appreciate it. All right. So we've read, discussed, looked at a lot of what's happening here, and we utilized a process, a method, or a spiritual discipline, how we want to view it, to highlight what we see so we can look well, not looking well in appearance, but seeing with God's lenses as we read scripture. Dawson Trotman, who was the founder of disciple making movement in the U.S. Called the Navigators, once said, "Seeing is having on our heart what God has on His." And so what we want to do is we want to make sure that when we see scriptures, we see what God sees. And then, and only then, can we have on our heart what God has on His. But if we don't see what God sees, trust the heart will see differently, and our hearts will not have on it what God has on His. So starts with how we see. And so we've done some things to really cause us to see clearer into the scriptures with our intent to have on our heart what God has on His. And it starts with an old simple question: what do you see? Or when we read texts or scriptures, we'll see a statement of how does it read? That's a Jewish idiom for what do you see, or what does it say to you? How do you read? How do you read the text? We see Jesus asks, how do you read? That's a simple statement for what do you see? What do you see in scripture? And to start off, we looked at somebody read verse 25 through 27.
I can read.
All right, thanks.
Okay, starting with 25. Now great crowds accompanied him, and he turned and said to them, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple."
Excellent. Excellent. So to help us put it in perspective, immediately after that, Jesus teaches a parable. And as soon as the rabbi teaches or speaks a parable, the students automatically know he's clarifying his previous statement to help us interpret what he truly means by his previous statement. So the parable's focus is preceding the parable itself. The parable's focus is preceding the parable itself. We have to ask ourselves, what led to the parable being spoken? This is the spiritual discipline. To better do that, I would first write it down. So in other places, you've seen me write down and ask you guys to reread verses 25 through 27 for this particular reason or point. It helps us understand or better ask the question of what led to the parable spoken. And as you guys look at the note, these are things that we commented together. This is what we concluded together. So what led to the parable spoken as a review? What did we see that led to the parable being spoken?
You asking us that right now, Case?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Like you looking up here, and we would say the large crowd following him.
Yep.
Any reason the parable was spoken.
So that's what we came up with. And that's what we discussed in the previous weeks. Large crowds were following him, which led to the parable. What else? Making it easy for us too.
But he turned and addressed the crowd, you know.
All right. Okay.
And he laid down some, I can't see it.
A prerequisite.
Chris,
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Yep.
I mean,
Uh-huh.
what do it mean?
Yeah, that means there was a prior requirement to do.
Are you talking about? Are you saying a prerequisite?
Yeah, prerequisite. There you go, teacher. Come on, teacher.
Yeah.
All right.
Yes, sir.
All right. So what does it mean? Say that again, brother.
Did we
Well-
correct on the outline that we got up there?
Oh yeah, we're correct. Just my pronunciation may not always fit words.
Okay, so that's like, how you pronounce it again, Cornelius?
A prerequisite.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
And so it's demands, requirements that precede an obligation or a commitment to something or opportunity to something, you know. And so we see Jesus discussing disciple making. He said, you cannot be my disciple, but he laid down some things that as a group, this is what we determined that was a prerequisite or prerequisite, all right, of it. All right. So what else led to the parable being spoken?
Okay. The challenge to love him more in every other human relationship less.
Yeah. And so we see in some of his statements, but prior to speaking the parable, there was a challenge to love him more over every other human relationship. And he gave it to us in a unique way that was understood in the culture he was from, but it may be challenging in the culture we're from. And so he says, if anyone comes to me, let him or does not hate his own father, mother, wife, brother, sister, children, sons and daughters, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. So this is a unique statement in our culture, but we understood that it was very common in our culture, and this represented a challenge to love him more than every other human relationship alive. That was part of the prerequisite, all right, of being his disciple. But it also led to the parable being spoken. What else?
Then he went on to say, or whoever does not carry his cross and come after me. That was another statement that he made. So coming after him was different than coming unto him.
Yes. And now it creates something that piques a lot of people's interest. First of all, we just think about the statement itself is familiar to most Christians. You know, we know Jesus carried his cross before crucifixion. We know Jesus died a death on the cross. He was taken down and buried. So, but this is prior to all of that. So he's given us a glimpse into, you know, things that will happen but there's an immediate understanding for his current disciples. This means something to them. All right. And what did we discuss about the meaning of this?
That's good. Whoever does not come, who does not carry his own cross, come after me.
Well, the meaning is that I recall is that this idea of coming after him, you have to love Christ more and everyone else, these other primary relationships less.
Yes, yes. Now that explanation fits the first statement of if anyone comes to me. Here we're talking about coming after him who does not carry his cross. What do we talk about? The representation of the cross meant to most people in this particular first century Jewish time. What would they have reflected on in the first century when they hear a statement about carrying your cross and coming after me?
Well, they would have seen many people carrying a cross in the Roman time and being executed up on the cross. So they would have seen that. And so they would have known, they would have kind of like had an idea of what Jesus was talking about by carrying your own cross. And this right here, when they say come after me, it means you got to, like you say, the first part, come to me, but coming after me will be a completion, commitment. You got to be committed. Carry your own cross. If you want to come after me, carry your own cross. That's a commitment that you would have to make.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And like Brother Will just mentioned, first off, in their culture, they would have reflected on the countless of times of traveling along the roads, seeing individuals being hung and executed on the cross. They also would have immediately understood the type of execution a cross meant. They knew that that individual hung for days, and depending on the will of the person, execution might have lasted longer because that person refused to give up the voluntary death that execution created. One is their limbs and their body parts would eventually grow weak, causing them not to be able to push themselves up and prevent suffocation. Give me one moment. I'm the only one here. I need to grab the door. I apologize. Continue to discuss. I'll be right back.
But that also would mean, like for an example, when you say carry your own cross, and then he was talking about how when they crucified them up on the cross, they would have to give up their will to live, right? And also we got to understand that that's what Jesus was telling us by carrying our own cross. We will be crucifying some of the things that we want to. And sometimes we don't want to just give up those things, like you say, we have a desire to keep those things in our life that we know are wrong. Right? We have a desire to just say, I want to keep this. I don't want to give up this. But when you give it up, it's dead. It's dead. It's gone. You have no more desire to do these things that are wrong. So with dying to oneself, like on the cross, you would be saying, I'm dying to my will and allowing God's will to be done, right? And sometimes it's a slow process because there's some things that I know I like and they are simple, but I'm beginning to know how, through this study, how to give up those things and die to them. And that's what it means to me by dying on the cross. You got it, Rabbi.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Appreciate it, Brother Will. All right, now you make a brother proud and smile. Come on, Pastor Julius. I see you got a comment.
Yeah, what I wanted to say, I don't know that makes sense, but there's something which was also crossing in my mind. that maybe what caused Jesus to come up with this parable was looking at their expectation. And he saw that the expectation from him was a bit different. So he wanted to clear them. They should not expect in a negative way from him. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. You know, I definitely agree. He wanted to clear up any false assumptions or false expectations. He wanted to make sure everybody understood his commitment to following him. You know, there were other rabbis in the culture, and obviously there were different reasons why different people pursued and chose to follow. But I think he wanted to clearly help them understand, like in a previous chapter, he made a statement about no man who puts his hand to the plow. And I'm sorry, I'm confusing the verse with something else, but no man is fit for the kingdom of heaven if he puts his hand to the plow. And basically, to paraphrase, doesn't follow through with commitment. So if you put your hand to the plow, the goal is to follow through and finish the work. And so if you put your hand to the plow and you don't complete the job or the task, you're not fit for the kingdom of heaven. And he was clarifying this false commitment of starting something and not being willing to complete it or follow through. I believe he was trying to clarify that particular concept here as well, but he was more specific on the nature of the commitment. He clarifies the commitment 2 times in verse 25 and 26 as he ends his statements. And he says the exact same statement in both verses is, if you don't, then you cannot be my disciple. And so he wanted to clarify that if you don't do these things, which are the inception of commitment or the initiation of commitment or the continuation in a commitment. And so we see that come to me means the inception of a commitment. Coming after me has a concept that reveals how to sustain and maintain the commitment and consistency, because this was not an easy task. Matter of fact, it also was a life commitment in this culture. So we understand the culture practices to help us see clearer to what Jesus is saying or initiating in this conversation. But to clarify it, to make sure he removed all false assumptions, he did what most rabbis do: teach a parable, to clarify everything. Why would he teach a parable?
A parable was the most effective way of interpreting the scripture and getting the student to see himself in the scripture. The audience. It was the most effective way of seeing. And you said that about parable is the most. I understand that. Can I ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
Okay, 1/3 of Jesus and the rabbi teaching was in parable, right? And we said it's the most effective way of teaching, right? So what was the other? Because I need to know what was the other 2/3 of Jesus' teaching.
Okay.
They tell me that.
Excellent. One was allegories. Yeah, one was allegories, and the other was just simple statements, narratives, or simple statements. So he taught in parables. He also used allegories. And then the other piece of it is just, simple statements.
Yeah.
Simple narratives. Or clear statements. Yeah. but we often know that the most effective way to cause the student to interpret the meaning of the text, which was Torah, was to teach in a parable, to clarify what he was saying. The simplest way to help the students come up with the interpretation and understand for themselves was to use or teach in a parable, and that's what he did. That's what he did. So yeah. All right. Let's keep going. So to see clear or clearly, so we can look well. All right. We talked about him mentioning this statement of he cannot be my disciple. We talked about the cultural meaning. All right. We also discussed that he, like Pastor Julius alluded to, he was setting a standard. You know, he was creating or setting a standard or reminding people of his standard. Every teacher, great teacher in our culture, had a standard they lived by. Every great teacher in our culture had what they call a yoke that they lived by. A yoke would help understand his doctrinal teaching, which defined how or he aligned his teaching with his standard, or how, you know, he aligned everything he did under the doctrinal yoke, which would create boundaries and guides for how he communicated his standards. All right. And that doctrinal yoke would help everybody understood the doctrinal yoke of a rabbi before they joined with him. They knew what doctrinal yoke, and there were two main doctrinal yokes in this culture. One was law over life and another one was life over law. And what that meant is that, you know, their interpretation of Torah, if two doctrines presented themselves in the same circumstance or event or moment, then the doctrinal yoke of law of life would supersede that, meaning the one that had more, if you had law of life, then I would choose the one that aligned more with keeping the law versus preservation of life. Life over law would mean the vice versa. If it was down to preservation of life over keeping the law, meaning they wouldn't disobey God's word to preserve life, but it would that God would be gracious enough to understand that life is more valuable in this circumstance than me being in violation of his law. In an example we laid out with in this chapter, in verse 1 through 6 of chapter 14, gave an example of that, meaning that they were bound by the law from their interpretations to honor the Sabbath and keep it holy. And the way you kept the Sabbath holy and honor it was to not do any creative work on the Sabbath. However, if there was life at stake, meaning an ox or a son fell in the ditch, and if they didn't get out, their life, they would lose their life. For you to have to go down and get the ox out or get your son out would cause you to do some work, you know. And they would say, God would be gracious enough for me to go and save my ox or my son without considering me violating his Sabbath, you know. So that's part of setting the standard, understanding the standard that he lived by and taught by. Comments, questions, or reflections before we continue?
Casey, are you saying indoctrinal yoke? Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's a doctrine. So just
No.
doctrinal line of teaching. Come
Okay.
on. Yes. I thought you had some. Did you have something too, Brother Rick?
No, I didn't.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thought I saw you on mute. May not. So yeah. So his doctrinal yoke which would talk about his philosophy behind his teaching, you know, or the standard inside of his teaching. All right, so continue through observation. We understand the reason the parable was spoken. We want to make sure we understood that. And we also saw in this culture that the crowd was following him from most likely what seemed to be from the previous narratives, influence from his authoritative teaching. Influence from his authoritative teaching over performance of miracles or the opportunity to be healed. You know, they were in high pursuit of some authoritative teachings that they had just heard, and it was common. It was a common response after a rabbi renders authoritative teachings. A lot of people or some individuals will begin to say, you know what, this is the rabbi I choose to follow with my life, because that's what it was in their culture. I emphasize that, but this wasn't said, and we don't see it in the narrative about this being a life commitment, but that's what it was. When you joined with a rabbi, it was about a commitment to life with the rabbi. It was a commitment to follow his teachings for the rest of your life, and to do that in the best way to do that in their culture, different from our culture today, right? A lot different from our culture, but in their culture, the best way to do it was to pursue the rabbi and join with him in life and pursuit. And that meant sometimes moving with the rabbi or allowing the rabbi to live with you. In this instance, Jesus went and stayed with Peter in his Badab, his immediate family, you know, and Jesus had other disciples that pursued to come and stay with them as well. And so Jesus began to open up Peter's home to other disciples who pursued him, right? But this was understood. You know, it wasn't an inconvenience. It was part of their culture. It was a cultural practice, and they understood that. All right. Any thoughts, other comments, or questions? So the next thing we did is we began to identify the characters, subjects, which are the people, places, and things described in the parable. In our culture, we would say the nouns in the parable. We want to identify the people, places, and things. And the first thing we began to identify was what?
Well, a large crowd once again.
So, yep. So the large crowds, which were reasons or the reason why the parable was spoken. So, of course, the large crowd, because the understanding of the meaning of the parable. The parables were designed for the individuals to see themselves inside of the parable, which eventually causes them to see themselves inside of God's teaching. So the large crowd. So at first, the large crowd had to identify themselves in the parable. And what were some of the subjects, characters, people, places, and things the large crowd had to choose from to see themselves in this parable? Let's do this. Let's read the parable. Somebody read verse 28 through 30.
For which one of you, when he wants to build a tower, does not first sit down and calculate the cost to see if he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who observe begin to ridicule him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish.
Excellent. So what are the nouns? What are the people, places, and things, the characters, and the subjects of the parable?
The tower.
All right, excellent. We see the tower. All right, or we see a tower, we see a tower mentioned. But yes, the tower itself would be one of the characters in the parable. If we write that down, but there was something uniquely spoken about this tower. How was this tower described?
Who wants to build a tower? Which one of you want to? It's a wannabe tower.
There you go. I like it. Come on now. So it's not necessary. We can see the tower, but if we look at or pay attention to the full description of this tower in this parable, it didn't leave it just as a tower. It had a special description or an explanation. It was a wannabe tower. I like that. Let's write that in. It was a wannabe tower. It was he who wants to build a tower. So it was a desire to build a tower. We don't necessarily know if it reached its completion because of the descriptions of what we see. So we see a wannabe tower.
Which one of you?
Yes. All right, we see which one of you. Now, this is the unique thing about it, and we have to immediately pick up on that. This is Jesus drawing the crowd into this parable. See, this is the wisdom and the intentionality of the rabbis to immediately draw the crowd. Which one of you? He's talking to the crowd. Now he starts his statement off with this parable of which one of you? Just like a parable is designed to do, it's supposed to draw the student inside of the parable to see themselves. So he starts off with which one of you, but he redescribes the which one of you first as a wannabe tower. So we see for which one of you, but the which one of you also represents the he who wants to build a tower, which is a wannabe tower builder. The wannabe tower builder.
Yes,
Come on,
yes, Rabbi.
come on.
I'm seeing also that which one of you also, I don't know, it can be pointing to commitment. Somebody a builder who is committed. And
Yes.
Jesus was looking for somebody who has the commitment to build.
Yeah, yes, that's good. And what we're learning to do, Pastor Julius, is to draw those ideas out and separate them. So we're going to come back to that statement in a moment, but we're learning to draw those ideas out. It's part of the spiritual discipline to make sure we don't overlook anything, right? Like the farmer did with the mule. He saw the end result of a hardworking mule, but there were some details that he overlooked because he jumped to the end result. And that's what we're learning to do in this spiritual discipline as we outline the parable. That seems to be obvious. That's kind of like, yeah, there's a commitment that he's looking for. Just like the mule. Yeah, this mule is a hard worker. True. But what happened with the mule, with the farmer, is it was a wannabe hard-working mule. It had the potential to be a hard-working mule, just like the crowd, the people in the crowd had the potential to have a commitment. They had the potential to build a tower, but right now, Jesus described them as wannabe tower builders, if that makes sense. All right. Something to keep in mind. But great response, great observation. But we have to learn to lay it out. You know, we have to learn to lay it out. So we got wannabe tower builders who were also described as which? one of you. All right. What other descriptions do we see of nouns in this verse? I already revealed them. I moved up too far, but no problem. Come on, let's talk about it. What do you see? We see a tower. We already talked about that. All right. What else do we see in the parable?
He who desires to build.
All right. He who desires to build. All right. Or he who wants to build. Yes, that's the, which one of you? All right. He who desires to build, some translations, or he who wants to build. All right. Any other observations?
Well, there's a foundation.
Yes. Yes. See, that's the only accomplished thing in the parable. When we look at this particular character in the parable, the only accomplished thing in the parable is the foundation. But if we build in a tower, what part of the foundation was completed in the building process?
Of this parable is going to be the foundation.
Yes. And the foundation is just the beginning. It's the inception. You know, it's the fundamental part and the important part, but it's incomplete.
So would the
Come on, Dr. Fred.
foundation be the come unto me?
I think so. Or even at this moment or juncture, right? That's a good point. That's a good question. You know, how can we describe this? Is it the come unto me here, or is it the actual speaking to Jesus, saying, Jesus, I want to follow you? You know, there was other places in the Bible, people came up and said, Jesus, I follow you everywhere you go. And then he says, foxes have holes, birds of the nest of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. And then immediately after that, we see excuses. But first, let me go and bury my father. You know, so what does the foundation actually mean? We don't necessarily know, but we do know it's the beginning piece. It could be anywhere from just the pursuit to the point of asking him to make to asking him if it was okay to make a commitment to connect. But it's just the beginning. Mm-hmm. It's an essential part of the process, important part of the process, beginning part of the process. But the reality of it is it's an incomplete part of the process. All right. So if we look at the foundation, it's the beginning part of the process. How else can we describe the foundation? It is not the finished process. It is the incompleted process. All right. It's the incomplete process. It's a part of the process that leaves the commitment unaccomplished. Because the commitment wasn't to connect. The commitment wasn't to start. And that's what we got to realize. It wasn't just to connect to Jesus. It wasn't just to become a believer. It wasn't just to get saved. It wasn't just to get baptized. I think that's where we lose it.
You tend to put an of right there after it's a part of the process. Of course. I'm quite sure you did. Yeah.
Nope, I didn't. Thanks. Yep. So it's a part of the process but it leaves the commitment unaccomplished. So a foundation. So this is different. These are different ways we can describe the foundation in this parable. Once again, it's about describing it in this parable. It's about seeing it clearer in this parable. All right. In this text, in this passage, how does it read? How does it read here? Not how it read before. Although if you notice, I'm bringing out statements from other places in the Bible, but I'm leaving some of those other statements off in other places of the Bible because I'm only highlighting what applies or what's applicable here. All right. So what other nouns, people, places, and things, characters in this parable do we see?
All who observe.
All who observe, yes. All who observe. So in this parable, all who observe, and again, we're just looking at this represents in their culture, the Jewish community. The Jewish community. All right. So
Where do we see that in the scripture? The all who observe.
verse 29. Somebody read verse 29.
Okay, all who see it. Okay, otherwise, when he has laid a foundation, is not able to finish. All who see it begin to mock him.
Yes, all who see
Okay.
it in some translations. Yep. So all who observe or all who see. Let me put that down. All right. Okay. And again, I keep emphasizing this. This is the spiritual discipline because we see a lot. Our mind begins to reveal certain ideas and thoughts and actually formulates connections. And we get excited. We try to move at the pace of our thoughts. The discipline is slowing ourselves down and separating or compartmentalizing what we see to make sure we see it for what it's saying and not move to the connections our brain or thoughts are trying to make us see, because that's where assumptions are born. Let me say it in another way. That's where false assumptions are born. So that's discipline of trying to separate our thoughts instead of moving ahead helps us see it the way God saw it and the way the original spokesperson placed it in there, who happens to be the Son of God, Jesus Christ at this moment, the rabbi, a rabbi in their culture. All right. Excellent. Anything else? Anything, any other noun, people, place, or thing in this parable?
I think I also see some money there because I'm seeing estimating the cost.
All right, when we're gonna have to ask you to repeat one more time. We had a lot of feedback. Maybe turn away from any other microphone that may give some feedback when you speak, but we want to hear what you just said.
Yes, I was trying to say that I'm seeing money as also one of the things here that was required.
Okay. Also put it in the chat for us as well, but it sounds as if I heard you say you see money. Is that what you said?
I think she was talking about where it said calculate the cost.
I'm
The
yeah,
cost.
yeah, I'm tracking. I want to make sure. I thought so.
Make sure. Okay.
Yeah, I thought so. So when we see, let's read it. Somebody read verse 28.
For which one of you, when he wants to build a tower, does not first sit down and calculate the cost to see if he has enough to complete it.
And what I want to help clarify on this is not necessarily a description of a noun, people, place, or thing. It's actually describing the actions of a people, place, or thing, a noun. All right. So that's what I want to point out. You know, that's a descriptive statement summarizing the actions of the noun, the person, or the wannabe builder, right? That's the action, description of an action of the wannabe builder, and not the noun or the character himself or herself. Does that help? All right, so let's continue to, and if we don't see any more, no problem. But I'll ask one more time, are there any other people, places, or things described in the parable that would represent the characters or a subject in the parable?
Are the observers, have we mentioned them?
Yes, sir. We have those down. All who observe it
Oh, yeah.
represent the observers, all who see it, which equals in reality or real time the Jewish community. So yes.
Okay.
Anything else other than those? Let me help us out.
What about the ones that ridiculed him?
Well, I think they represent all who observe it.
Observe the same one. Okay.
Yeah, but ridicule him describes the summary of all who observe actions, right? That's a summary or description of the actions of those who actually see and observe. All right.
Okay, so you saying that the ridicule would be like describing those that seen him, and the action you see, they would be saying this man began to build.
Yeah.
And,
Well, no, I hadn't mentioned that statement yet. I hadn't mentioned in verse 30. What I did clarify is that the statement of they began to ridicule summarizes or describes the actions of all who observe according to this parable. According to this parable, those who observe began to ridicule. Now, verse 30 begins to describe what the ridicule statement was.
okay.
All right. Verse 30 begins to describe or quote what those who observed said in ridiculing him. So they're re-emphasizing what was observed and what was said previously. They're just saying it in their own words in the parable now, if that makes sense. So what they do is they begin to re-describe the wannabe tower builder and how, and that's the next noun, people, place, and thing we see is the way the observers describe the wannabe tower builder. They call him the man who began to build and was not able to finish. That's another noun. It's just a description by the people who ridiculed how they describe the wannabe tower builder. The way they describe the wannabe tower builder is here. A man began to build and was not able to finish. This is how they describe the wannabe tower builder. It's a man who was building but was not able to finish. All right. now, next step. All right, again, we see the discipline that it takes, but the next step is to summarize the actions of each one of these. So let me help us out. We got large crowds. And inside the parable, we see the large crowds described as a wannabe tower builder. Inside the parable, we see a goal of a noun, of a tower, but we don't see the completed process of it, but we still put it down. A foundation is part of the process that's not finished. We see all who observed, and we see a man began to build and was not able to finish. So let's keep those in mind. And now let's first describe the actions in the parable of the wannabe tower builder. What do we see that? How do we describe the actions of the wannabe tower builder in the parable? What do we see?
Someone who doesn't first sit down and count the cost.
Excellent. Yes. Yes. Excellent. Very important. Because again, it's helping us with spiritual discipline. It's helping us compartmentalize to see clearer of what God is saying. And it's going to lead to something else, right? It's going to lead to eventually an application in the interpretation process. All right. So we see the first description of a wannabe tower builder, and we want to understand that that's where it came from, is that he does not first sit down and calculate the cost to see if he has enough to complete it. Or we can simplify it and say he did not sit down and calculate the cost. He did not sit down and calculate the cost. All right. He did not sit down and calculate the cost. This is the description of the actions of the, like that statement, Dr. Fred, the wannabe tower builder. Yeah. So this is the description of the actions of the wannabe tower builder. Jesus is trying to make a point in this description of the wannabe tower builder, which actually represents the large crowd. But we could also say, we're going to come back and circle up on this and clarify. As you see, I'm not writing it down, just want to keep emphasizing it, because the key is to see ourselves inside the parable. So now we're going to talk about this in a moment, but we also have to place ourselves in the parable. We're would-be tower builders. Doesn't matter if we have committed to the process for life, we still have to describe ourselves and see ourselves in the parable as a would-be tower builder, because there's an application to us, to you and me eventually, right? And this is the first question we ask ourselves. Do I want to follow Jesus for the rest of my life? If the answer is yes, at some point you are a would-be tower builder. Whether or not you're still there or not is not about the question, or it's not the question at hand right now. The reality of it is, if I've made a commitment or I have a desire to follow Jesus the rest of my life, at some point in my life, I was or am a would-be tower builder. All right. Now, next statement. Summarize the actions of a tower. Summarize the actions of a tower. Can we summarize? Does it summarize the actions of a tower? Is the first question. Does the parable summarize the actions of a tower? Because we have a tower as a noun, people placing things, subject in the parable. Does the parable describe the actions of a tower? And the tower is a completed or mature disciple.
No.
All right, so okay, no. Let me tell you what that means. That's not the meaning of the parable then. If he doesn't describe or summarize the main actions of the parable is not about that. All right. See how that helps?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. It's not about that. All right. It's not about that. So in the process of elimination, we know the parable is not about a completed tower. We know the parable is not about a mature disciple. The parable is not about that. All right. Makes sense? All right. Now, next thing we described is a foundation. Does the parable give us a description or summarize the actions of the foundation in the parable, or a foundation in the parable? A little tricky.
It's incomplete.
He laid it.
Yeah. How do we know that?
He laid it, but he didn't.
He
finish.
laid it, but he didn't finish it. Or he
Yes.
wasn't able to finish it.
Yeah. So that's the description, or that's the summary of the actions of the foundation. It was laid, but it's not finished. It's not finished. And if we see that when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, the foundation is incomplete.
And I wasn't reading your notes. I was looking at my Bible. I didn't even see that up there.
Gotcha. No problem. No problem. Yeah, but no, that's good. Let me do this. It's about not able to finish. It's incomplete. Because that lets you know also that there was a bigger goal for the foundation than just to be a foundation. There was a bigger goal. And the Bible says if you're only a foundation, in this statement by Jesus, it means you cannot be my disciple. You cannot be my disciple. And the crowd listening is picking all of this up. All right. What about all who observe? Does the parable describe the actions of all who observe?
They began to ridicule him.
Yes. Yes. All who observe begin to ridicule.
That sound like modern day America.
Oh yeah, right. Modern day America, the first century Judaism. Anytime you start something in both worlds, East and West, and they know you had a goal and you didn't finish, you can expect to be ridiculed. Yes.
All, by all.
By all. Yes. By all. Let's keep going. Let's go back. So we also said that some of the actions is that this particular crowd spoke or they gave a statement. All right. So we could actually put that whole statement that they spoke down to summarize the actions and describing the actual words that they spoke or the ridicule that they gave. They says a man began to build and was not able to finish. So that in itself is a noun and an adjective or adverb. Or now adjective, not an adverb. Or adjective statement or objective statement. So I began to build and was not able to finish were the exact words spoken by all who observed. All right, all who observed. This is what was said. So we could put that same statement down here one more time. All right. Now, next step. We got our reason the parable was spoken. We identified the people, places, and things, or the subjects and the characters in the parable. We've summarized those actions that was discussed in the parable by those. Now we got to talk about what is the main event. Out of all of this, what's the main event in the parable?
Was he trying to separate the people who would?
Well, I'm not asking us to guess. I want us to look at the summarized actions. And out of all the summarized actions, which one of them would be the main event of the parable?
So you talking about 34 and 35?
No, sir. In 29, 28, and 30, let me give us the summarized actions one more time. We had one of the actions was he does not first sit down and calculate the cost. Another one was he's not able to finish. And another one was began to ridicule. And the last one was this man began to build and was not able to finish. Which one of those would be the main event of the parable?
Or this man began to build and was not able to finish?
All right. Anybody else?
I'm gonna go back to what I said, the wannabe tower builder
All right.
or wannabe.
Okay, gotcha. Now, describe the actions. I like that. You just pointed us in the right direction. The subject. All right, we talked about characters, people, places, and things, but the subject. Now we're using our English construction. All right, you got a subject, a verb. All right. Now your subject of the parable means the person who the theme of the parable is the wannabe tower builder. Come on, Brother Will.
I said the subject is, like you say, the tower.
Or the wannabe tower builder. So now, to summarize the main event, we have to summarize the actions of that wannabe tower builder.
Began to build, laid the foundation, the construction site.
They didn't count up the cost.
They didn't calculate.
Yeah, he didn't calculate the cost.
Right.
That becomes the main theme or event. He didn't calculate the cost. Now, the construction site will be the venue place. the main venue place, the construction site itself, but the main action of the main character is not sitting down calculating the cost. That gives us the meaning of the parable, the reason why the parable was spoken, or the theme or the message he's trying to convey. So basically what he's saying, sit down and calculate the cost, or never ever don't sit down and calculate the cost. Because now that's the reason why the commitment or the tower was never built. The reason why the tower was never built is because the wannabe tower builder never sat down to calculate the reason or the cost it would take to build. So this spiritual discipline helps us understand all of that, right? And let me see how we got it as we unfold. All right. The main event, and I actually got two different questions here, but we see the construction site is incomplete. All right. But there's a reason why the construction site is incomplete. There's a reason why a foundation was laid, but was not finished. All right. At the construction site, we know a man began to build a tower and was not able to finish, an unfinished building site. However, the main event or the summary of all of it was he did not sit down and calculate cost, which points us back to the reason for all of these. The reason for the results of these two. Now let's keep looking. What are the observable outcomes? We begin to say this stuff in a different way because it's leading us to conclude. Now, what I just mentioned, I want to make sure that's it. You know how you work a math problem and there's a way to check your math problem, right? It's a way to make sure you came up with the right result, right? This is what this is about. This is what this is about to do for us. We want to make sure we came up with the right results. We want to check it, although we immediately what we would do is we got it. I saw your heart, Dr. Fred. As soon as we heart something, we're going to move to the next deal because I got this. The spiritual discipline is to cross-check it. Make sure I'm seeing clearly. I want to make sure I'm seeing it clearly. So now let me continue. What are the observable outcomes, conclusions, and results in the parable? One of the outcomes, conclusions, results is people began to ridicule him. Ridicule equals moral failure, spiritual failure, disobedience, missing the mark. All right. And disobedience and missing the mark is sin. Another observable outcome is an unfinished tower, meaning not unsuccessful, not being successful or unsuccessful. So it's not about accomplishing anything. All right. The whole thing is actually one of the results is whatever I did, it caused me to be ridiculed. It caused me to have moral failure, spiritual failure, disobedience, missing the mark, sin. It caused me to sin. Whatever happened. All right. Now, is there something to consider? The dilemma. And the big dilemma is what? Out of all of this, what's the big dilemma? We've already talked about it.
Would it be the cost?
Or would it be the failure to calculate those costs?
Failure to calculate.
That's the big dilemma here. That's the big dilemma. Because we see the results, the conclusions, but what led to them would be the dilemma. What led to them will be what I should consider of it in it all. is the failure to calculate, not being his disciple, not finishing the completion of the tower, was incomplete. The tower was unfinished. Have we considered calculating the cost, or the issue is he did not calculate the cost to complete. He did not calculate what it means to follow Jesus in their culture. That's what Jesus is saying. All right. This is what we fail to do. This is the big dilemma, or it's the big dilemma. All right. And again, we see the cannot be my disciple if I do not finish the building. The building cannot be his disciple if I do not finish building the tower. And what led to all of that is this: failure to calculate the cost to complete. Not just failure to calculate the cost, because he probably knew how much it took to build the tower, or maybe he didn't. But what he didn't calculate is how much would it take to finish it. That was the big dilemma: failure to calculate the cost to complete it. So all this is summarized: not calculating the cost to see if you have enough to finish it. That's the big dilemma, which is the thing, which is why I concluded this particular passage is about the cost of not being Jesus's disciple. It's not about discipleship tested. He didn't test discipleship. He highlighted the failure of it. The cost of not being his disciple. All right. So, and we've already done what we compare. What can each be compared? So we've been doing this the whole time. This was the next step, right? Let me go back and show us. So we compared, and go all the way back. We compared, one is a wannabe tile builders compared to individuals in the crowd. So we would take this. What can each be compared? Wannabe tile builder equals or compared to individuals in the crowd, in the large crowd. All right. We also compared the wannabe tower builder individual in the large crowd as only a foundation, not a tower, but only a foundation in the parable. So we will also put them down as a foundation. And we described a foundation. A foundation equals an incomplete building site or an incomplete building or tower or an unfinished tower. Or ultimately, Jesus says, if you're an unfinished tower, if you're only a foundation, you cannot be my disciple. So a wannabe tower builder is, most importantly, get this, A, would be disciple of Jesus Christ. A would-be disciple of Jesus Christ. That's what it can be compared to. And the goal is to compare this to you and I. So this is another thing. See, the original audience, large crowd. In the kingdom, a would-be disciple of Jesus. Making it personal, you or me. You and me. All right? If this is us. So we got to make it personal. Let's keep going. Get back to my color scheme. All right, let's keep going. Everybody see where we're going now. So let's go back up. So we got a tower. We're gonna come back to that. We already compared a tower, completed mature disciple. So we could just take down. However, the parable is absent of this. It was the goal, but it's absent in the parable. This was the goal, but it's absent. He wasn't teaching about this. He was teaching about not accomplishing this. Right. This was the goal, but it was unfulfilled. It was unfulfilled. So let's keep going. Once again, this is a process and a spiritual discipline. It helps us see clearly. Let's see what we got up here, okay? So we talked about the foundation, right? Yep. All who observe, we talked about that. Comparison. Brother Will gave us our modern day comparison to this. We've been doing this. All who observe and see the original audience, Jewish culture. Here, what do you say? Modern day America. All right. We could say also friends, family, loved ones, church community, hey, neighbors, co-workers, whoever knew your goal was unfulfilled. Let me just clarify that. Whoever knew your goal was unfulfilled. So who have you told that you're a disciple of Jesus Christ, follower of Jesus Christ? See, if I'm only a believer and not a disciple of Jesus Christ, that's an unfulfilled goal. The goal is not to just be saved. If I'm only baptized and not a disciple of Jesus Christ, that's an unfulfilled goal. If I'm only a member of a church, that's an unfulfilled goal. The goal here is to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. So a lot of you guys know one of the statements that you hear or you see I've adopted is I'm committed to building, reproducing disciples according to the standardized process of Jesus Christ, which is why we study the Bible the way we do. I want to see how Jesus built disciples and use his standard of building disciples and reproducing the process. He used a standardized process of Jesus Christ. I can't go make up my own process. And the other challenge is it's not obvious or clear, but we learn to study the Bible in a certain way where we highlight what is clear. All right.
You mind restating that? I'm committed to reproducing disciples according to
The standardized process of Jesus Christ. The standardized process of Jesus Christ.
So I'm committed to reproducing disciples according to the standardized process of Jesus Christ.
Yes, sir. Yes. Yes. Excellent. All right, let's see what else we can get in before we get out of here today. All right. Comparisons. Somebody tell me while I'm looking for this. Why comparisons?
Comparisons is terrible. Oh, go ahead, somebody else.
No, that was you. Come on, that was you.
Okay, parables are comparisons.
Yes, excellent. Couldn't have said it better myself. Comparisons are parables. A man began to build and was not able to finish. What's the comparison? Think about the original audience once again. What's the comparison?
Is it to build and not finish?
Well, let's think about the nouns, all right? In Jesus' original audience, what was the noun? How does the Bible describe the noun?
The crowd.
Yes. So, large crowds, a man. So he's talking to the large crowds. A man began to build and was not able to finish. Large crowds is the first comparison. What will be remember, comparisons to the original audience. So the large crowd will be a comparison in the original audience. Now, what will be the comparison in the kingdom of God?
Disciple.
A disciple of who?
Jesus Christ.
Yes. A disciple a man began to build, was not able to finish, a would-be disciple of Jesus Christ. All right. Now, so a would-be disciple of Jesus Christ. And today we got to ask ourselves, is that you? Is that me? Is that me? Am I a man who began to build and was not able to finish? Is that me? Is that me? Am I a man who began to build and was not able to finish? Is this me? Guess what? I could never answer that for you, but time will tell for you and me, right? Only time will tell. Matter of fact, time has already spoken to the people in your life. Remember your neighbors. Remember your co-workers. Remember your church community, your loved ones, family, and friends. They already know. Time has already spoken to them because they observe, they see you. So time has already spoken. Is this you? Is the question. Are you a would-be disciple of Jesus Christ who had a goal to be a mature disciple of Jesus Christ, but it's unfulfilled? People can't recognize your pursuit of it or your desire to fulfill it. Is this you? I think this is a good statement to close out on for the thought of the week or the rest of the week. Is this you? Is this you? Our next task is just to help organize everything we just created in our comparison, or we actually walk through section B. We actually walk through section B by looking at subsection G. It's just defining. What do we have to do this? We had to know what a parable was, a mashal was, a Haggadah was, and it's a comparison. Simple and plain, the root of it is a comparison. A short, succinct story that illustrates a specific point by means of comparison. The rabbinic parables illustrates this point by redescribing in drama the nature of God and human responses to the aspect of that nature. The nature of God has disciple making in it. That's one of the things we got to understand. It has disciple making in it. Jesus described the nature of God as being his disciple or not being his disciple, and the human response is whether or not we fulfill that goal or not. It is referred to as an elusive narrative told for an ulterior purpose. Here, Jesus told an elusive narrative for an ulterior purpose. A parable was a way a teacher revealed the truth to the teaching to his audience students, allowing the students to come up with its meaning. You and I were students. We came up with the meaning. Jesus did not. He spoke the parable. He made the meaning obvious to you and I. So the use of an illustration that is cast alongside and is used parallel to compare a moral truth to a spiritual interpretation. The moral truth here was unfinished tower, a man who began to build and was not able to finish, one who desires or want to build a tower but didn't consider the cost. The spiritual interpretation is not fulfilling your goal to the kingdom of God as a disciple of Jesus Christ. I think we need.
I have a question.
Yes, come on.
So I was trying to understand that at what point in my life do I really consider myself to have failed to calculate the cost? And then also, I would like some clarity on the would-be disciple of Jesus Christ, because now I'm being discipled, and I want to understand at what point in my life do I reach to that point where people begin to ridicule me? That is what I would like to understand, because I'm already being discipled.
Yes. And fortunately, Winnie, there's one response to all three of your questions. Your first question, if I recall, is at what point am I considered someone who failed to calculate the cost? And it's only at the point when someone sees you not pursuing the goal of being a disciple, which you just clarified isn't the case for you because you just emphasize how you are being discipled. And as soon as somebody can see in your life you're not pursuing to fulfill that, then you fit the person who didn't calculate the cost to see if he had enough to finish. I know personally individuals who did commit and were pursuing to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. And I do know some of those individuals who I do not see or observe them pursuing to fulfill that, meaning they've abandoned that to do whatever else. Maybe they abandoned it just to go to church. But I can't say. See, it's indefinitive, or it's not defined in just going to church. I don't know. Yeah, you can go to church. Yeah, that's a good thing. But I can't tell if you're pursuing Jesus to be his disciple by just going to church. All right. So hopefully that helps, or does that answer your question, Wendy?
Yeah, it answers. So then when I reach a certain point, when I reach a certain point and I'm not reproducing any disciples, do I consider myself to have failed to calculate the cost if I fail to reproduce disciples after some time?
Well, reproducing disciples may not be defined by you not pursuing at a period of time, because it takes time to reproduce a disciple. I can't really say about if you're not reproducing a disciple, then it means you're not considering calculating the cost, because you may still be in the process of being a reproducing disciple yourself. This is what I always say: the simplest equation of disciple making is being and building. So if somebody can see that you're still being, then you're not eliminated. But at some point, being will cause reproduction to happen, and that's only determined by God's timetable. To be honest, I've been in this relationship for about 13, maybe 14 years. But I don't believe, nor can I identify having a reproducing disciple within the first 7 or 8. Just being honest. I didn't get discouraged. I didn't give up. I didn't abandon I'm gonna give us a hint until our next job start next week. I didn't seek out the other king to seek terms of peace, to stop the battle or the war. I continue to fight, continue to battle, continue to build, trust the process, and God's timetable produce reproducing disciples. I can't say if it's going to take 7 or 8 for you. It took 7 or 8 for me. I didn't abandon being, is what I saw in other individuals who were walking alongside of me in the first 2 or 3. You know, is it didn't work. Now I attempted. I invested in people and men. They abandoned the process or didn't become a reproducing disciple. And I almost let it discourage me. But I stayed connected to the process I was introduced to in the first place. And I realized it was God's timetable, not my timetable. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you so much. That helps.
Yeah. Now let's look at culture on that. Culture says from 13 to 30, 17 years in their culture, or up to 17 years in their culture. Let me say it that way. So if I apply their culture, I have no reason to be discouraged after 7 or 8. I continue to build until God's timetable meets my efforts and my obedience. This is another thing we have to remember. Matter of fact, Soup and I were just talking about this in the discussion we had a couple of days ago. And he was reminding me, every disciple God chose was successful. every disciple he chose was unsuccessful. It's about being in a process where God identifies who that reproducing disciple he gave you influence with is. You know, I look at Dr. Fred and Brother Will and John and you, Julius, you, Lopez. I didn't choose any of you men. I recognize God's choice of you. Matter of fact, the men I chose aren't even here. They were several years ago. That I chose them. They're not here today. Cornelius, you are. I didn't choose you. I recognize God's choice of you. So yeah. Final thoughts, comments, questions, and reflections before we get out of here.
Are
Go
these,
ahead.
are these notes available in the GE Google Drive community?
They are not. You talking about the ones we've taken so far today? Let me copy and paste and put them there. Or I'll copy and paste and put them in the group me. But they are not. I will make them available.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right.
My takeaway today, it is so important that I have learned how these scriptures connect themselves together. Do you realize when we talk about the Great Commission, did you realize that we have been sent and that we don't have no time to just sit and look and do nothing? We'll be an unfinished job.
Yes.
And a lot of people believe that getting up in the morning, that's going to a church on Sunday and Wednesday, that they are doing what Jesus Christ commanded them to do. And I'm sorry to tell you that's not true. I look at the large crowd. The large crowd means that everybody in the crowd, everybody that I get a chance to talk to, they have a potential to become a disciple of Jesus. I don't know who they are, but I can tell you the qualification. It's a process. If you're not willing to do it, you might as well don't get started, because just building a foundation and then don't complete it, you're wasting your time. So I look at myself as not an unchild, but as a person who is building on this time.
There you go. There you go. There you go. That's good.
You know, and building, and I appreciate the fact that doing this today, I have a reason for living, and then tomorrow I got a reason for living. What I mean, not tomorrow, like tomorrow. I'm talking about in the afterlife.
I get you.
I got an afterlife coming. So yes, Rabbi, I am here.
Excellent. Excellent. You just highlighted another description that's important that we left out. There was absence of work in the parable. There was absence of work. As long as the visible work on the construction is happening, you're still working towards the goal. But in the parable, there was absence of work towards the goal of building. Good stuff. Anybody else? Any other comments or questions? All right. Well, I'll share these notes. I'll share the video link. And we've had another great discussion. And most importantly, whether you guys know it or not, I've learned a lot today. And I couldn't have done it without you. And I hope it was the same for you guys. So I love you guys. Look forward to continuing to do this together. Until next week, you guys have a blessed rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye, everybody.
We'll see y'all. We will be on remote next week, live in Columbia, Louisiana, but we will be present. All right. See y'all next week.
Great.
All right.